The director shouted "Action" 3 times, but my husband kept kissing his childhood friend passionately. The director shouted "Action" 3 times, but my husband, a celebrity, remained locked in a passionate kiss with his childhood friend. As his assistant, I gently reminded him of the situation. However, the old friend broke down in tears in front of the entire crew, claiming that she was too immersed in her role. My husband scolded me, saying my eyes and heart were so dirty that I saw malice in everything. That night, the paparazzi caught us entering and exiting together from a 5-star hotel. In the past, this would have devastated me, made me obsessed with him, running to manage the public relations crisis while crying secretly. But this time, I realized that our 5 years of secret marriage meant nothing. Shortly after speaking with a lawyer about divorce, Eduardo entered the lobby with a lipstick mark on his neck, left by his childhood friend, Camila. When he saw me, the smile faded from his face. His look turned cold, and he said, "Valéria, you don't understand your place. This is a resting room for the lead actors, organized by the crew. What are you doing here?" I walked to the makeup table, grabbed my thermos, and responded indifferently, "I'm picking up my things." Eduardo had started his day at 5 a.m. I had prepared his food in the thermos at 3 a.m., but when I realized he hadn't even touched it, I understood that he hadn't even tried it. When he saw me turning to leave, he frowned angrily and added, "Don't prepare food anymore." This wasn't the first time he said my food was bad. Before, I would have exploded and complained, "Didn't you say you wanted to eat what I made for the rest of your life? Why don't you like it anymore?" But this time, I didn't even bother to argue. I just murmured as I left. Eduardo called. "Tonight, there's a dinner with the crew. The director wants me to talk to Camila about the script." I pretended not to notice the guilt in his voice and replied coldly, "Fine." After I closed the door, I threw the thermos in the trash. The last scene had been filmed near home, so Eduardo didn't stay at the hotel. He came back around midnight, and when he realized I wasn't waiting in the living room like I usually did, he pushed open the bedroom door and said, "Valéria, you know I have trouble sleeping. Why didn't you prepare my relaxing tea last night?" I replied as I covered myself with the blanket, "It's finished. If you want, you can order something for delivery." With a slam, he slammed the door and went to the studio. This was his way of showing he was mad. In the past, I would have stayed up all night, humiliating myself to apologize. But that night, I didn't go after him or do that. At dawn the next day, the crew moved the filming to a remote mountain. For the first time, Eduardo allowed me to travel in the same van as him. As soon as I got in, Camila, wearing a backless dress, elegantly approached and asked, "Eduardo, do you have mosquito repellent? They always bite me." When she saw me, she changed her tone. "Oh, Valéria, you're coming too? Then I'll take another car." Before she could finish her sentence, Eduardo ordered coldly, "Valéria, can't you be sensible? Stop causing problems. Go in the assistant's car." For the first time, I didn't argue. I left the van without protest. As I walked away, Eduardo frowned. 5 minutes later, I received a WhatsApp message. "Today, Camila has a scene showing her legs. Don't take it the wrong way." I replied briefly, "Understood." The typing bubble stayed active for a few minutes. Without thinking much, I closed WhatsApp and turned off my phone. Without Eduardo's orders, the landscape on the road became more beautiful. That night, while Camila timidly aligned herself in his arms, she said, "Don't take it the wrong way, there's nothing between us." Eduardo didn't explain anything, just held her tighter. I limped away and found a secluded spot to tend to my injury. When I returned, everyone had already left. Darkness enveloped me, and the sounds of wild animals echoed around me. I curled up next to a tree and waited in fear until dawn. When I descended the mountain, I finally got cell phone signal, and Eduardo called me, furious. "Valéria, why didn't you answer after my calls? Camila got bitten by mosquitoes. Go to the hospital and buy medicine for her." I stayed silent, listening as he became more impatient. "I give you half an hour to return to the set." I calmly replied, "I'm on the mountain." There was silence on the other side, followed by his softer voice. "Stay where you are, I'll come get you. It'll take an hour." The sun was already high, but Eduardo never showed up. Finally, I dragged my injured body back to the set. When I arrived, Eduardo was inside the tent, finishing a call with a new assistant candidate. He glanced at my phone and asked coldly, "Who were you talking to?" I answered emotionlessly, "Someone you don't know." He assumed it was a stranger and didn't ask further questions. He threw a box of food on the table. "I brought you something to eat." When I opened the box, I smelled the sour stench of spoiled leftovers. Eduardo cleared his throat. Someone grabbed the wrong box. I lay on the bed and replied, "It doesn't matter, I already ordered my own delivery." His expression darkened. "Why didn't you tell me you were going to order food?" "Valeria, I've told you many times, there's nothing between me and Camila. It's just scene chemistry. Why do you make such a big deal out of it?" I replied coldly, "I'm not making a big deal. My indifference bothers you even more." He insisted, nervous. "Then why didn't you buy the medicine?" "It was just a small favor." Exhausted by his abuses, I answered from the bed, "I'm not feeling well, I won't go." That night, Eduardo and Camila became trending on social media. A video showed Eduardo carrying her like a princess to the hospital. Determined, I contacted journalists to make the scandal go viral and secure 50% of the profits for the exclusive. The next day, the love story between Eduardo and Camila dominated the trends. While Eduardo filmed in another city, I had everything ready for our divorce. When Eduardo finally came home, his face was tired and irritated, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He tried to approach with that same arrogant expression he always wore, convinced that a cold request or a veiled order would fix everything. But to my surprise, I no longer felt intimidated. Something inside me had broken completely. "Valeria, I want you to stop talking to the press. This is already out of control. Camila is upset," he said as he threw the keys on the table, as if his order was unquestionable. I looked at him with a calmness that seemed to haunt him. His eyes showed a spark of surprise when he realized there would be no excuses or explanations from me. I took a deep breath and let the silence speak for me, causing a growing unease in him. "Are you listening to me?" he insisted, his voice taking on a threatening tone. "I am," I answered flatly while continuing to fold the clothes I had set aside to donate, including some pieces he always said he loved to see me wearing. Now, they were nothing but rags with no meaning at all. He moved closer, crossing his arms and narrowing his eyes. "What are you doing? This is ridiculous. Just because the press exaggerates, you think you have the right to act like a child." "I've already made my decision," I said calmly, like a rock. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. The divorce will be official in a few weeks." His expression froze for a moment. It was as if control slipped through his fingers, and he didn't know how to react. For the first time, Eduardo was face to face with someone he couldn't manipulate. "This is because of Camila, isn't it?" he asked incredulously, trying to regain control of the situation. "There's nothing between us, I've said it 1,000 times." "You're exaggerating." "No, Eduardo. It's not because of Camila," I smiled, but it was a bitter smile I didn't even recognize. "It's because of everything. Every bitter word, every humiliation, every night I spent awake trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed." He opened his mouth to say something, but I raised my hand, interrupting him. "And I'm not going to argue. I'm tired, very tired," I added, turning my attention back to the suitcase I was finishing packing. "You can't just leave like this." Eduardo finally exploded, anger pulsing in his voice. "We have an image to maintain. You can't throw everything away over some silly crisis." I looked at him, feeling something new and liberating grow inside me. Contempt. "I already threw everything away a long time ago, Eduardo. Only you didn't notice." That was the moment I saw fear appear in his eyes. Not fear of losing me, but fear of losing control, of losing the facade he had carefully built over the years. And for the first time, I saw exactly what he was. Fragile, vain, and small. He took a step back, as if he were about to argue, but there was nothing left to say. I was free. I grabbed the suitcase, turned, and began walking toward the door. "Valeria," Eduardo called, in a lower tone, almost pleading. I didn't look back. I passed through the door without hesitation and closed it behind me. Freedom, though heavy and unknown, felt sweet. In the following days, I made sure everything was in order. I asked the lawyer to speed up the divorce process and moved to a modest but cozy apartment. While the press feasted on the private revelations, details of the blatant betrayal were leaked. Public opinion turned against them like a storm, destroying the perfect image Eduardo had cultivated. He sent me several desperate messages, begging me to stop, but each one was ignored. He was alone, sinking into the mud he had created himself. And while his career collapsed and Camila abandoned him to save her own skin, I finally smiled. The revenge was complete. Now I could move on, not as the submissive and invisible wife of a celebrity, but as someone who had finally rediscovered herself and learned to love her freedom. Weeks later, the divorce paperwork was finally completed. A sense of relief washed over me when I signed the last document. Eduardo was now a bitter memory, a weight I had finally lifted from my shoulders. And while he struggled to maintain appearances with his ruined image, I was already planning my future. The first thing I did was open a communications consultancy specializing in managing crises like the one Eduardo was facing. It was ironic, I know, but now every painful experience I had with him would become a powerful tool to help others and, of course, to help me thrive like never before. The first few months after the divorce were silent. Eduardo disappeared from the spotlight for a while, probably hoping the scandal would cool down. I heard from mutual friends that Camila left him shortly after the news broke, claiming she couldn't risk her career for a doomed romance. He was alone, bankrupt, and trying to salvage whatever contracts he still had, but most companies didn't want to associate with his name. When I finally heard from him, it was through a court summons. Eduardo was suing me, demanding financial compensation, asking for half of the company I had just started. He claimed that during the marriage, he had supported me emotionally and therefore had a right to part of what I had built. I laughed when I received the papers. It was typical of him. Even after everything, he still believed he could control me and benefit from my success. On the day of the trial, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high and the confidence I had taken years to build. Eduardo was there, sitting in the front row, with that air of superiority he was still trying to maintain, though visibly worn out. His expression changed when our eyes met. I could see that he expected me to falter, to beg for some sort of reconciliation, but I didn't falter. I just smiled, cold and indifferent, just like he always did with me. The trial was long and exhausting. Eduardo presented all sorts of ridiculous arguments, claiming that my company had only prospered because of the influence he had exerted on my life. But my lawyer, a brilliant professional, dismantled each of his claims with solid evidence and testimonies showing how Eduardo had never contributed to anything. On the contrary, he had been a constant obstacle. After hours of arguments, the judge finally delivered the verdict. Eduardo was entitled to nothing, not a cent. Furthermore, he was ordered to pay the court costs for trying to manipulate me legally. The expression of defeat on his face was priceless. He seemed unable to believe what was happening. Leaving the courtroom, I felt a weight lift off me. It was over. There were no more ties, no more threats, no more emotional blackmail. I was free. Justice had been served. Over time, my business prospered. I landed important contracts and became a reference in the market. With each achievement, I remembered the times when Eduardo said I wasn't capable, that my dreams were foolish. The irony was delicious. Now I was an independent and successful woman, while he, once an admired celebrity, was reduced to a shadow of what he had been, forgotten and without opportunities. I received occasional news about Eduardo over the years. He tried to rebuild his career, but without success. His few famous friends abandoned him, and without advertising contracts or relevant roles, he gradually faded from the media. The last I heard of him, he was living off a distant relative, trying to stay out of scandals. As for me, I learned to take care of myself and put myself first. I reconnected with old friends, traveled, explored new hobbies, and allowed myself to live without fear or guilt. I also found new love, someone who treated me with respect and kindness, without emotional games or manipulation, someone who was by my side for who I was, not for what I could offer. And although I moved on, I never forgot the lessons I learned alongside Eduardo. The greatest one was that self-love is the only true form of freedom. No matter how much someone tries to control us or make us believe we're worth nothing, we always have the power to rewrite our story, and that's what I did. I rewrote mine from a painful ending to a fair and happy one. Now, when I look back, I don't feel anger, only gratitude. Gratitude for finding the strength to leave a toxic relationship, for overcoming the hardest battles, and most importantly, for discovering that the most powerful justice is the one we make for ourselves.